I'm Nicholas Bornels of Capital Link, and I would like to welcome you to this very, very interesting panel. Our forum, which takes place in the context of the Singapore Maritime Week, aims to showcase the competitive positioning and excellence of Singapore as an international maritime center. And one of the areas where Singapore has excelled is technology. So we are delighted and privileged to have with us Singapore-based industry leaders who are going to talk about the very topical theme of Singapore pioneering digital transformation and the Silicon Valley of Maritime. I am grateful to Dr. Shahrin Osman of DNV. We have a great relationship with DNV all around the world, and I'd like to thank him for putting together this top caliber panel. And I will turn the floor over to him, and I would let him introduce our panelists. I would like to say a big thank you to all of you addressing this very interesting topic to an international audience that will be logging in to listen to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicholas, and good afternoon, evening to everyone. Yes, my name is Shahrin Osman. I am the Regional Head of Maritime Advisory at DNV, looking after the consulting, R&D and innovation activities of DNV within Singapore and the wider region. And again, thanks to Capital Link for inviting us, to moderate this session. And I'm really glad that during this panel session, we have, the panelists that are not just themselves, but the organization, industry leaders sitting within the Singapore ecosystem and wider. So quickly, I will mention the name of the panelists, and subsequently I will request them to introduce themselves, the organization that they represent. So we have Mr. Dhritiman, the Managing Director of the EPS Accelerator, powered by Techstars. We have Mr. Keng, the Managing Director, Business Development for the Quark Singapore Maritime Group. We have Mr. Leslie Yee, the General Manager responsible for Information System at PIL. Mr. Nakul Malhotra, the VP for Open Innovation at Wilhelmsen. So you can see then that the panelists that we have here represent, one, of course, from EPS, I would say the largest independent ship owner here in Singapore. Keng, representing the Quark Maritime Group, that is the largest maritime conglomerate with business in the deep sea, in the shipyard, as well as in the offshore side. Mr. Leslie Yee, representing PIL, and PIL is Singapore's largest, locally based owner-operator within the container segment. And not to forget, Nakul, representing Wilhelmsen, founded in 1861, and now is one of the world's largest product and services solution provider for the merchant fleet. So you can see here then the panel members representing really important organization, especially within the Singapore ecosystem. So if I can quickly then hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe Dhritiman, would you like to start first?
Sure, Shahrin, thanks a lot. Thank you for having me in this panel with all of our illustrious colleagues and peers from the industry. I think you've already introduced East Pacific Shipping, a very large independent player with a diversified fleet that's operating all around the world. We, as Techstars, came in contact with Eastern Pacific about 3 or 4 years back. And as Techstars, we are kind of investors in technology companies and technology startups from around the world. And that's what we've been doing for almost 15, 20 years. We've always been very excited about investing in the maritime and supply chain space. And when we met Eastern Pacific, it was very clear to us that they shared our vision and our ambitions when it came to technology in the maritime space. So we teamed up and we've been investing together for the last 3 years. And I would say it's been nothing short of a resounding success. So we're looking forward to sort of building on that activity and doing more.
Thanks, Dhritiman, for the nice introduction. Maybe next, Keng, like to introduce yourself and your organization you're representing.
Thanks, Shahrin. A very good morning to everyone. I'm Keng. I'm the Managing Director of the Quark Maritime Group. The Core Maritime Group have diverse maritime interests. We have 5 shipyards globally, largely residing in China, Batam, and Singapore. We have PCL, which is a deep sea vessel owner and operator, operating bulk carrier, gas carriers, and break bulk vessels. We have Porsche, which operates more than 70 offshore vessels servicing the various segments in the energy space. And I also sit on board the Quad Maritime Ventures, a company which we have started up a couple of years ago. I think our objective is to use our domain knowledge in the respective maritime sectors and identify budding startups which are able to contribute and also to make a difference to the whole ecosystem. Our pitch has always been that we are able to assist startups by providing them with the go-to-market, by lending them a hand in plugging into the industry, and more importantly, by coming up with solid problem statements for the startups to excel. So very grateful to be here today and look forward to the discussion later.
Thanks, Singlin. Leslie, you're next.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Leslie. I'm the General Manager for IT in Pacific International Lines. So Pacific International Lines is, as you mentioned, the largest container line in Southeast Asia, operating about 100 plus container vessels, focusing on Asia, Africa, Middle East, Oceania, and Latin America. Right, so I lead the group IT applications developments, operations, and security for the headquarters and over 65 offices around the world, including the vessel IT and OT equipment on board the vessel. So PIL, just a quick overview, PIL started our digital transformation journey about 10 years ago, right? Starting with our vessel fleet systems, remodeling to our core liner management system, and currently our global finance system, right? We have also internally collaborated with various tech startups. We have successfully trialed blockchain-based EBL with IBM TradeLens, for example, and IMDA Trade Trust. And most recently, we have also invested in SG TradeX, which is a common data infrastructure for standardizing data exchange across the Singapore-based supply chain. As well, I'm also serving in the Singapore Shipping Association, in short SSA, in the Digital Transformation Committee, and also the Cybersecurity Subcommittee. Right, SSA DTC vision is to contribute to build Singapore next generation maritime digital ecosystem by partnering various stakeholders in the SSA community and also the industry partners to work on digital transformation initiatives. Right, so we will work with various startups and companies to drive some of these initiatives. So one example is SSA in collaboration with MPA and IMDA recently launched the Maritime Digitalization Playbook in 2020, 2021 to support maritime companies in accelerating their digital initiatives. So this provides a very end-to-end comprehensive view of the various technologies available and how maritime companies can draw on this technology, right? And this was mainly these insights are mainly drawn from the IMDA yearly Digital Acceleration Index survey done with all the maritime partners, right? In addition, the Cybersecurity Committee has also quickly raised the vessel IT/OT cybersecurity awareness and readiness on our members companies and started development of a cybersecurity maturity scorecard as a self-assessment tool to help ship owners and managers to measure their existing risk level and to plan for their future investments. So these are some of the key things that are happening with PIL and also the SSA community. Thanks, Shahrin.
Thanks a lot, Leslie, for giving a bit more introduction with regards to the activities, not just within PIL, but within the maritime community in Singapore. Last but not least, I think we have Nakul, and I'm really pleased that Nakul has agreed to be part of this panel because, of course, like what I say about Wilhelmsen, it's a large, global maritime group. So it's really good to also get an outside-in perspective, from an organization that also have seen how things develop, in other parts of the world. So Nakul, if you can, introduce yourself and your role, I think within Wilhelmsen, that will be great.
Thanks, Shahrin. First of all, let me just say I'm super excited to be part of this panel. I think it's it's always very exciting to be part of a panel with so many diverse experiences. I think that's really looking forward to it. As you mentioned, Wilhelmsen is I like to call it a 160-year-old startup. We're obviously been around a long while, and in maritime all the way through. We are a company that's very much embedded in the maritime space as such. Really, it's set up in three key segments: the strategic investments, new energy, and maritime services. New energy is really about us participating and contributing as far as the energy transition space is concerned, particularly in hydrogen and offshore wind value chains, in addition to a number of other opportunities as we've been exploring and discovering in recent times. Maritime services is really, as you refer to, our product and service offering to the maritime industry with a number of well-known brands associated with that, but really also, and I'm domiciled in the maritime service segment, and I think what's exciting is that what our digital journey, as Leslie mentioned as well, it's not a switch that we switched on last year sort of thing. This is something that we've been working on for a very, very long time. Our maritime service segment, given its diversity of presence in the maritime value chain, right from ships agency, ship management, marine products, the insurance offering, and so on and so forth, really offers quite a lot of insight in terms of potential areas for digital transformation, and something that we've been very excited to investigate and develop further. Myself, I'm actually a seagoing marine engineer. That's my qualification. So I've been in many ways the sharp end here. But came ashore. I've been with Wilhelmsen for 21 years. Worked in a number of different geographies, a number of different functions. But most recently, I've been very much embedded in working with our corporate venturing activity, particularly together with startups. We have a fundamental philosophy that indicates that we see an extremely symbiotic relationship between our corporate capabilities and the freshness that startups can bring, both from a consumption lens but also from a co-creation lens. And as a consequence, through equity and non-equity partnerships, and embedded in, as you mentioned, an open innovation philosophy, very, very keen to build out and participate in ecosystems and clusters, ultimately to drive the industry forward, but also to ensure that we maintain a relevance as these value chains evolve to the future.
Thanks, Nakul. Thanks, everyone. And now let's talk about Singapore. I hope that, I think the audience have seen this report. It is about the leading maritime cities, 2022. And it is through this report, this is the 5th publication, report jointly published by DNV, as well as with Menon Economics, and I'm the lead author, I think, for this report representing DNV. That this time around, in addition to Singapore being #1 overall, as well as #1 city with regards to attractiveness and competitiveness, that Singapore is also #1 in maritime technology. And I think on that regards, we did a survey as part of this study. I think there's close to 300 people, experts globally, participated in the survey. And one of the survey questions is about, which city the expert considered to be best positioned for digital transformation. And Singapore has been ranked overwhelmingly top, #1. The next city is quite far off. So I think at least from the survey is an indication of the perception of the experts globally with regards to Singapore's position within digital transformation. So now I would like to hand over to the panel members to share what are their perspective about the key elements that makes Singapore to be world leading with regards to digital transformation within maritime sector. So maybe if I can start first with you, Keng Lin, maybe can you share your perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Shahrin. I think Singapore, as we know, is a very uniquely positioned. It's a unique city. I think it's quite rare to find a a country which is so small and with such a busy port, and more importantly, a convergence of various ship managers, ship owners, and the various domain experts are coming together in one small city, right? From one end to the other end of Singapore is 2 hours drive. So that gives us also a unique advantage in that, people from within the ecosystem, we can get access to each other very well. We have shipyards in Singapore. We have shipyards for ships to do the maintenance, for ship costs, for bunkering, and that in turn attract a lot of marine professionals into the country. So I think in the startup scene, I must say that it has been very encouraging, and I think the rest of the panelists would have shared my view, that compared to maybe 5 years ago, where we were all talking about, trying to change ourselves, everybody embarking on the digital roadmap on how to change ourselves. I think we have come a long way from that. Today, we have lots of startups coming to us with brilliant ideas and coming to us with quality problem statement as well. So I think one of the key ingredients is, I think it may be a cliche, but I think the public-private collaboration is essentially one of the driving factors because of that. I think the government, Singapore government, has been very supportive and in fact very encouraging in that matter. I think GovTech has done a good job. MPA has done a very excellent job in trying to push the digital transformation along. So I also sit on the SSA council member. One of our key drive is to assist our members in trying to drive the digital transformation. So I think we have all the key elements that is required for Singapore to be a digital hub. I think the rest is, to encourage more like-minded partners from all over the world, encourage them to come over here to Singapore, physically or digitally, and then set up shop here and use Singapore as, an incubator or accelerator. I think what EPS has done is a very good example of what could have happened if we have enough accelerator or incubators in Singapore. So I think personally, I'm very encouraged by the scene. It used to be what many labeled as a sunset industry. I think I must say that at this moment, I would say that the dawn has never been prettier. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Keng. And then since you mentioned, Keng, about this public-private partnership, and Leslie, I think you mentioned earlier that you are in this SSA Digital Transformation Committee. Maybe on the broader scheme of things, what are your views with regards to why Singapore is perceived to be leading in the areas of digital transformation?
Yep. Thanks, Shahrin. So as what Keng mentioned, Singapore, I recently saw a survey that how is the confidence satisfaction level of Singaporeans with the government sector digitalization initiatives. So we get an overwhelming 99% for very satisfied in terms of the services. So it means that Singapore and the government sector has pushed very hard on digitalization. I think we have gone very far in overall bringing up the entire country towards digitalization, right? And now it is pulling along with the help of the various maritime industries and the various partners like SSA, strong partners like SSA, right? Singapore Maritime Foundation, SMI. So a lot of maritime focused industry and communities that are pulling in this same direction, right, towards digitalization. So, for example, we also have a lot of help. SSA also work a lot with MPA and the IMDA and to drive a lot of new initiatives. Some of the new initiatives, for example, right, is the IMDA Tech Skills Accelerator. So this is things that our company is also using to upskill our existing resources, right, into the digital new technologies, right? It doesn't mean they're not tech savvy. It means that we need to upgrade ourselves. So it provides funding and subsidy to help us go into an on-job training kind of a scheme, together with good courses out there for us to upskill ourselves in key areas like cybersecurity, like the AI, the data analytics portion. So it's very good. right? And on top of that, MPA has various funds and subsidy schemes like the Maritime Cluster Fund, and they also churn out the together with PSA. There's also the new initiatives like Digital Port as SG and the Digital Ocean. So these are various areas and platforms that we are integrating, and we are working with the various maritime partners to build the standardization and the APIs, right, towards integrating with all their internal systems, right? So these are all very exciting and encouraging developments in the digitalization space, especially for the maritime.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks for going deeper. I think with regards to not just from the government kind of a push, but also from industry association and other agencies that you have mentioned, and also the focus about the talent development. I think with the program that you mentioned. So I think what you described, from a perspective of the entire multiple stakeholders ecosystem approach, and being done in quite an aggressive way. That's really something that probably has led to what I mentioned, overwhelmingly the global expert feel that Singapore is leading. And then on that perspective, right, of course, Nakul, I think Wilhelmsen operate globally, and you personally have been traveling and being posted in different cities, in different parts of the world. Can you share from an international maritime organization perspective, how the community, in Singapore have benefited based on what, Keng Lin as well as Leslie have described of the ecosystem approach that we're having here?
Yeah, thanks, Shahrin. So I think that's a really, really interesting question. And obviously, there are key maritime centers, and we're seeing more and more innovation, and we're seeing more and more efforts, particularly in the startup space, coming out from a number of different centers, right? So, Rotterdam, the Athens, Piraeus area, you've got sort of the Middle East, you've got the London sector, and obviously you've got both coasts in the US as well. But I think, what makes Singapore unique, and I think something that they've managed to leverage on, which is really exciting, is Singapore ultimately is always been a key operational center in a lot of the elements in shipping, whether it's bunkering, whether it's transshipment, whether it's the key port activities, crew change, and so on and so forth. And therefore, its foundation as an operational center, on top of Leslie described some of the policy frameworks that kind of really take that step forward, right? But ultimately, policy frameworks are catalytic at best. And so they're really good at starting the process, but the sustaining of the process has to be as a consequence of an inherent business demand in that center. And that's where the operational aspect comes in, right? Even if you think about ship owner and ship manager locations and so on and so forth. So I can continue. I think what we're really starting to see, and we need to understand that maritime is, as far as tech is concerned, maritime is still at its nascency. I like to describe it like a time machine. Basically on the weekends, we're all in 2022. And then when we come to work on Monday, we go back to like it's 1995, right? There's, we're still trying to chase up orders and POs, and it's a really complicated and complex sort of stakeholder environment. But I think that what happens in Singapore, again, from a policy framework, we're also an industry where innovation essentially gets triggered as a consequence of regulation. But what we're seeing now is a lot of the innovations, particularly in the decarb space, in the supply chain resilience space, if you think about drones, if you think about autonomy and so on and so forth, it really is moving faster than the regulation, and therefore regulation needs to catch up. So what Singapore has done really well is to create these regulatory sandboxes, these drone estates, these areas of experimentation, a safe space for both startups and corporates to try to test these ideas out. And that's a really important next step as well. I think the other element, and if we compare it with like the Silicon Valley thinking, trying to tie up with institutes of higher learning, trying to tie up primary research with its commercialization and application. Still a long way to go, but if you take a look at the overarching policy framework, there's a clear intent of connecting institutes of higher learning with the maritime community in order to be able to derive commercialization of some of that primary research. And finally, I think, at the base level, really, I'm a believer that, for this kind of change and this kind of scaling to take place, you have to hit the 3 C's, right? You've got to hit capital, you've got to hit competence, and you've got to have that culture. And I think as we start to see, examples of PitchBook, for example, for the first time, and bear in mind, shipping is a 10,000-year-old industry, right? But for the first time, you see PitchBook identifying maritime as an emerging opportunity space. That means that people are now paying attention. For all the wrong reasons, supply chain is an issue, and people are trying to recognize, well, what contributes to that, and shipping constitutes, arguably 85–90% of world trade. So any resolution as far as supply chain solutioning is concerned needs to encompass a shipping lens to it. And for all of these reasons, talent and capital gets attracted. And in my world, talent and capital is a leading indicator to great solutions, which is a leading indicator to the transformation of an industry. So for all of these reasons, super excited about maritime, but also super excited about the environment within which we operate in Singapore. I think it's a great opportunity to really leverage that thinking and follow, in many respects, the path that Silicon Valley followed. The more we can get great solutions and startups being successful, the more we'll get founders, new founders, and this sort of incumbent startup relationships taking place. And I think that's critical in the maritime space.
Thanks a lot, Nakul, for elaborating, I think, on that point in terms of the, coming from you and Wilhelmsen perspective. And I think on that note, we have talked a lot about the ecosystem and how the various, public-private partnership and the wider community have been involved as part of the transformation. If I can go to Dhritiman, is then that, of course, Techstars, like I say, they have invested in all technologies, but then, they have also now decided to move into maritime, and have decided to set up, your first global maritime, tech space here in Singapore, working jointly with this EPS. So if you can give your perspective of how, this EPS Techstars, have benefited, by being in Singapore, by your early kind of funding to some of the startups, and what do you see really, where other companies can also benefit by probably, to be part of that community here in Singapore.
No, I think a lot of the reasons why Singapore is an attractive destination for a startup founder that is working on technology for the maritime sector, I think Keng and Leslie and Nakul have covered it fairly exhaustively. If I had to just add one more thing to it, I think one thing that Singapore has that some of the other maritime hubs in the world don't have is Singapore is also a trading hub, which means there is a huge financial services community based over here, banks, trade finance, et cetera, et cetera. And I think what startup founders around the world who are focusing on the maritime space are realizing when it comes to the maritime opportunity is, look, the opportunity isn't just limited to building a hardware solution for a vessel or a software solution for a vessel, but maritime is actually a gateway to a trillions of dollars trade opportunity, supply chain opportunity. And there's that's kind of, the larger the addressable markets are for these startup founders, more and more founders tend to get attracted towards the opportunity. So I think this is what founders globally are realizing, that maritime is acting like a gateway to these bigger sectors. And Singapore provides this confluence of maritime, being an operating HQ, a bit like Nakul mentioned it, but also having this trading hub and this trade finance hub to it. So I think that's one more reason why Singapore is attractive as a destination. But, sort of looking ahead, I feel like what we need now is, and playing off that Silicon Valley example, the reason why Silicon Valley became Silicon Valley is because a few people wrote checks towards some startups and then they made a lot of money out of it. And then others wanted to get in on the action. So more and more founders got in on the action and started companies, and more investors got in, and then it was a virtuous cycle that kept spinning and becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So I feel like what we as a sector now need to deliver is some 1 or 2 outsized successes, like billion-dollar outcomes, right, as maritime startups. And I think if that happens, and all of us are, stakeholders in the Singapore maritime community, we'd love to see that success happen here in Singapore. And I think if that happens, we will see an order of magnitude increase in the action that we're seeing in the maritime tech space. And I think this event is just, a few years away, not that far away.
Thanks, Dhritiman, for sharing your thoughts. And I guess before we talk about what more needs to be done, I think it's also useful could be to assess in terms of our success so far, and maybe from your own experience of running this EPS Techstar Accelerator program, right? Maybe can you share some of the success that you've achieved by being here in Singapore in that regards?
Sure. I mean, I thought Eastern Pacific was really forward-thinking in how they thought about this partnership when they first put it together. Their entire approach was, we don't want to go out and find technology and invest in technology and invest in startups just for our consumption, right? We want to be able to invest in stuff and then share it with the rest of our colleagues in the broader maritime industry. We want to be a change maker in the industry is the attitude that they took. And how that reflected in how we operated was we invested in startups from around the world, from the US, from the UK, from Israel, from the Nordics, et cetera, et cetera. And when they came over to Singapore, or when they became part of our program, we introduced them to shipping companies and all sorts of stakeholders from the Singapore maritime community. And what was really interesting was after they'd met, port companies, various other ship services companies, other shipping companies, financiers, et cetera, talent, et cetera, from Singapore, a lot of these startups turned around and said, hey, maybe we should not be domiciled in the United Kingdom. Maybe we shouldn't be domiciled in Norway. We should be domiciled in Singapore. And we saw quite a few companies flip where they're headquartered from another country to Singapore, because we took this view of introducing them to the entire community when they became part of our program. And I would call that a success. I mean, as Eastern Pacific, as Techstars, we only want to see the maritime community in Singapore grow and thrive like this. So that's definitely a win for us. But being investors, we also have to look at the returns that we make out of the investments that we've made. And on that count, we've also been very fortunate. Some of the startups we've invested in have gone on to do very, very well. Lots of them have gone on to raise funding after they graduated from our program. Most notable of which, and most recent of which, is Nautilus Labs in the fuel optimization space. They just raised 34 million US, which I think arguably is probably the largest fundraising round in the maritime tech space. And they had gone through the first year of our accelerator a couple of years back. And when we look at our returns, I can't disclose our returns publicly, but when you are investing in the venture capital space, you aspire for at least a 20-25% return. I can tell you our return is much, much, much higher than that so far. So we've been very encouraged with what's happened so far. We've had companies relocate to Singapore. That's a win. Our companies have gone on to do well. That's a win. And our returns have been great. That's a win.
Yes, great, Dhritiman. I think it's an excellent sharing. I think from you, I think with regards to how, whether a shipping company or we say then an investment company have really benefited, by being in Singapore, and what you described about the ability for them not just to work with EPS, but working with other shipping companies and the entire ecosystem right here in Singapore. Because And this is something that, Nakul have alluded to, in terms of the rest of the activities, right, that's available here in Singapore. And I guess on that note, maybe Nakul, if you can share your perspective, provide maybe some of the examples that you see, Singapore have increasingly, have more and more semblance of a Silicon Valley from the maritime space. Maybe if you want to broaden a bit on that aspect.
Yeah, I think some of the examples that Dhritiman mentioned are super relevant as well. And I think so let me put it this way. I think what we're seeing is more and more companies in Singapore, just because of the narrative and the collaboration opportunities, realizing the distinction between consumption and co-creation. And so that's like a really important step forward as well. I think, when you talk about Silicon Valley, you can't avoid the entire VC conversation. I think what's really exciting is to see the number of VC firms or funds that are now domiciled in Singapore and that are focused on maritime. So these guys are setting up, and their value proposition is a strategic maritime VC fund. And I think that's really exciting, right? And their LPs are across the maritime value chain. And I think some of them have GPs that come from other VC thematic funds, or that are coming from maritime and going into the VC space, or are coming from other locations and setting up here in Singapore. So that really starts to give me a lot of enthusiasm for the fact that just to be able to have a number of VC funds that are dedicated to maritime is an indicator to what I talked about in terms of attraction of capital. And that, as a consequence, attracts more founders as well, right? Because it becomes attractive to be based here, prioritized here, and so on and so forth. So I think that's really important. I think the second thing is we're seeing also, and from our own perspective, we're seeing examples of these collaborations resulting in, and success means different things to different people. So we're seeing some of these collaborations result in corporate buyouts already, and then getting embedded with another corporate, and then moving forward. And that's great if it works for those stakeholders. We're seeing it evolve into joint ventures that are being spun out, and that's great if that's what those stakeholders want to go. We're seeing it getting ring-fenced, and cap tables opening up much wider. And so these initiatives and collaborations between maritime corporates and maritime startups spinning out into separate companies with lives of their own. And I think that's really exciting. And then finally, we're seeing a heck of a lot of examples of just startups gaining traction, gaining that adoption, breaking down the barriers, moving from this MVP piloting only phase to actually getting embedded into operational, part of the regular process type phase. And I think it speaks to the maturity of where we need to get to. We need to see a lot more of those, but it also speaks to the fact that I'm hoping that we can see a lot more double-digit Series A's. We'll hopefully see a lot more Series B's coming out. I think we have to take cognizance of the fact that it is still nascent. So if you take a look at the funnel of pure maritime startups, there's still not enough. So I think there's space for a heck of a lot more as well.
Thanks a lot, Nakul, for sharing your perspective. And I think maybe then I can ask Keng Lin, to share the perspective of, you mentioned, Keng Lin, and that you also sit at the board of the KSL, Maritime Ventures, right? Then of course I know, KSL, they are very prudent, I think, with regards to the investment decision, with regards to making sure, as I said, that they always make the right move, So maybe if you can share in terms of the background of why that the group, the TSL at the group level feel then that there's opportunity space, I think, within the maritime sector, within the VC and the startup, that you decided now to invest, really put in the money, and to get your hands dirty, with regards to going deeper within that ecosystem.
So yeah, I think Shahrin, you're absolutely right. I think for any investor, when they start a venture fund, they are looking for returns, right? So likewise, I think when we look at this, we're also looking at returns. And the core group has been investors of, we have a global investment office. So it's a family office that focus on different types of investments from startups to the more mature public money. So we decided to set up this KSL venture fund a couple of years ago, I think for a few reasons. One is that we think that, quite a few years ago, we think that disruption will be here with the energy transition, with all the digitalization. And we do not see enough products available for us to solve our own problem statement, right? So even today, there are a few very big problem statements that we are facing. I mean, in the face of alternative fuel, what would be the transitionary solution for us? Given that every ship is multi-million-dollar and we can't just chuck away. In Singapore, we have our cars running fossil fuel have a COE, right? We have a lifespan. At the end of 10 years, we can just scrap it and then we buy an electric vehicle, right? So that's easy. But for a ship, it's not so straightforward, right? And the thing is that because the ships trade worldwide, so what would be the solution for us? I think that's something that we are very focused on, and we want to do our part and reduce our carbon footprint. But there are just not enough, proven technologies out there in the world today to help us achieve all that. And that's just one example, right? So we decided let's get our hand a bit dirty, and then let's set up a venture fund, and let's try to identify budding startups that demonstrates potential to help solve all these problems. And that is basically the whole gist of it. And we are also it's not just a VC concept that we have. We are also, we have this mode of venture building. I think we want to help our startup do well, right, with the resources that we have, not just within our organizations, but within Singapore. So whatever resources that we have, we help them, provide them with the domain knowledge, and a bit like what EPS Accelerator is done. We link them up to various key stakeholders. We help to short circuit the process for them to get up to the mark, to identify what they do not know, right? I think it's important to know what they do not know and lead them funnel them to the right direction. So the whole basis of setting up a venture fund is really, there is a huge gap out there to what we want to achieve versus what is available. And like what Nakul said, we are at a very nascent stage. We are at a very preliminary stage where, I think 10 years ago, it's hard to introduce change in the maritime industry, because there will be someone who will tell you, in my 40 years of history working in the maritime sector, this cannot be done, right? This is a universal statement that I have heard from a lot of maritime companies, and okay, not least on my own as well. So today, we have come a long way to say that what changes needs to take place for all this, to be implemented. And when companies know what changes they want, they have to look for the solution. And that is a big gap that we have identified, which means that there's tremendous opportunities, for the startup scene in Singapore. You have a conducive environment, it's nascent. Everybody wants to be the first unicorn, like what EPS say. We need, a few huge success. Once we have a couple of the huge unicorn, I think that would in turn lead more companies to Singapore or to the maritime industry as a whole. And that itself would be, a virtuous cycle to lead on a cascade to bigger things. So when we set up KSL Maritime Venture, that's our hope, to be able to identify the budding technologies, whether in the digital space, in the energy transition space, and then we help them with what we can, incubate them or accelerate their path. And of course, I think right now we are still trying to build up a portfolio, and that has been our difficulty actually. How do we build up a sizable portfolio so that we can manage it from a portfolio's point of view and target a certain return, right? So I think as more companies step forward, as more startups is being created, that will allow this vision to be realized.
Thanks a lot, Keng. I think we really such an excellent discussion that time is running out. And just to reiterate what Keng said, I think DNV also, we see this as a decade of transformation. We see a tectonic shift, I think within the industry. So if I can have a closing kind of just one or two, statement from the panelists, we are now talking to an international audience that may not be familiar to Singapore. So if there's one, thing that you like to say that to attract, some of these whether startup or investors or shipping organization, to consider, to have a platform based in Singapore, what will it be? Maybe I can start first with you, Leslie. I think 20 seconds from you.
Yep, thanks. I think quickly we all agree that all the panelists mentioned a lot high potential. Yes, Singapore is really a high potential area of 3 key areas. To me, they are in the sustainable green technology, R&D, maritime startups, and maritime IT, OT, cybersecurity space. These are my top 3 areas that we are looking actively into. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for Leslie. Dhritiman, from you?
I think when startups are trying to make a decision on whether city A should be their future home or city B or Singapore, I think the one thing I would say that Singapore has going in its favor, in addition to all of the other things we've discussed on the call, is there's a thriving venture capital community over here. 10 years back, the VC community managed barely a few $100 million. Right now, it manages well in excess of billions and billions of dollars, in excess of $10 billion here out of Singapore. So it's a massive venture capital community. And this VC community fundamentally recognizes and understands maritime, right? Because when they are driving to work, they drive by the port and they see ship after ship after ship after ship. So there is a fundamental recognition of how large the sector is, how large those markets are, right? So as a startup, I think you'll find a very large and welcoming VC community here. So I'll end on that note.
Thanks a lot. 15 seconds, Nakul, for you to wrap up.
Pretty simple. I'm just going to say maritime matters. If it's involved in 85 to 90% of world trade, but it's still stuck in the 90s, can you imagine the scale of opportunity that's possible? I'm going to leave on that note.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nakul. Closing word from you, Keng.
Yeah, I think for startups, if you want to reside in a country where you have access to POC easily, POV, the proof of valuation, I think this is the place for you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Keng, and thank you so much for all the panelists. I think it's really been a good discussion. I think it gives us quite a broad understanding, why Singapore has been voted #1. I think with regards to the maritime technology, and overwhelmingly voted, #1 on digital transformation, and why we have a good understanding of why Singapore is now termed as the Silicon Valley of maritime. I think with that, thank you very much. I hand over to Nicholas.
Well, my role is very easy. All I need to do is to say a tremendous thanks to all of you for a great discussion, and indeed proving that Singapore is the Silicon Valley of maritime. So thank you to Dr. Osman for his expert moderation and for inviting you all, and each one of you for a great contribution to the discussion. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.